Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
It's 9:30 on Monday the 3rd of July. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
Very good morning. Thank you for joining us. Now, despite calls for calm, France has been rocked by a sixth night of protests and riots across the country, marking a weekend of violence as thousands were arrested and dozens injured. We'll have all the latest this morning.
And another Tory revolt. It's on immigration this time as Prime Minister Rishi Sunak faces calls from his own MPs for stricter immigration rules for care workers, students and refugees, of course.
It's the viral video provoking outrage this morning. A Sussex police officer refusing to attend a crime just metres away from a local co-op. We'll play that full video shortly. As always, we want to get your thoughts this morning. What does it say about the people in charge of keeping us safe? Email us gbnews@gbnews.com.
And we're going to cross live, of course, to Wimbledon to soak up the atmosphere as the 136th Wimbledon Tennis Championships begins today. Won't be a British winner.
Let us know your thoughts on all of our talking points this morning. gbnews@gbnews.com is the email address. But first of all, here's the very latest news with Tamsin Roberts.
Bev, thank you and good morning from the GB Newsroom. It's 9:33. The British Medical Association says doctors could continue to strike over the next few years if their demands are not met. It comes as junior doctors are planning to stage the largest walkout in the history of the NHS later this month. The 5-day strike action will be from the 13th to the 18th of July. A firefighter has died after a 6-night of violence in France. More than 100 people were arrested after rioters torched cars, looted stores and targeted town halls. 3 police officers were also injured. It follows the death of teenager Nahel Mazouk, who was shot by police in the Paris suburb of Nanterre last week. President Emmanuel Macron has postponed a state visit to Germany this week to deal with the crisis. Moscow says 700,000 children from the Ukrainian conflict zones are now in Russia. The head of the International Committee in Russia's parliament says his country is protecting the orphans fleeing the bombing and shelling. Ukraine accuses Russia of illegal deportations, whilst the United States says Moscow is forcibly removing children from their homes. Labour claims state schools in England have paid over £8 billion to recruitment agencies since 2010. It comes as the party says its plan to address concerns over the retention and recruitment of teachers, which would save taxpayers billions of pounds. The party plans to introduce a new retention payment to encourage teachers to stay in the job after completing the 2-year early career framework. Well, you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com. Now, though, it's back to Andrew and Bev.
Well, Britons are bracing themselves this month as we're yet again set to be plagued by a series of strikes across the NHS. The head of NHS England has warned of a level of disruption, adding that patients will be paying the price for the unions and the government not resolving their disputes. Some talk these disputes could go on for another 2 years.
Honestly, the doctors are threatening that strikes in the NHS could continue until at least 2025 unless the government meets their demands. Well, joining us now is political commentator Piers Pottinger. Feels like we've been talking about strikes in the NHS for a really long time, Piers, and I don't know what the solution is. Do you?
No, and I don't think anybody does. I think the problem is that one party has got a tin of Band-Aid and the other party has got a box of Elastoplast when it comes to the NHS. And finally, over the weekend, the head of the NHS came out of her cupboard and talked about how it was the patients were going to suffer. Well, it didn't take a member of Mensa to work that one out. Yeah. Unfortunately, what everyone really should face reality. We need a royal commission. We need a complete restructuring of the NHS, because throwing more money, patching bits up, saying you're going to hire thousands of new doctors and nurses in years to come is not going to get ahead of what's happening. The change in demographics, the way that people are having more illnesses now diagnosed, so they go for treatment, so there's more different kinds of treatments required. All of these things, we're behind the game, and everything they're doing at the moment is trying to patch it up. Equally, for junior doctors to demand 35% pay rise at a time like this is preposterous. And they should sit round the table, get practical, please put political differences aside and actually try and do something to stabilise the NHS. It's not going to get much better. It's probably going to get worse until there's a real fundamental change.
And Piers, we saw, because the Mail put this on the front page last week, the consultants were going on strike for 2 days, straight after the junior doctors. They're earning on average £128,000 a year. And on the 2 days they go on strike, oh, very nice too, they can go and earn thousands more in the private sector. That's allowed.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely disgraceful. It's the only way to describe it. And those consultants really, I think, should look at their conscience very hard indeed, because I think it's outrageous what they're doing. And as the head of the NHS herself said, the only people suffering will be the patients.
Yeah.
Is the problem partly, Piers, that no political party wants to be the one who goes down in history as the person who finally brought the NHS to a close, effectively, by the definition that we have at the moment, free at the point of service?
But you don't need to close it. I mean, it's been 75 years since it started, and you actually have to change it.
Yeah.
An awful lot has changed in 75 years. Marvellous technology, all kinds of new kind of diagnosis. The demographics have changed completely about the ageing population. So it's quite right, you need to look at it again. I also think that in the past, whereas a lot of voters would have been very nervous about anyone tinkering with it, they all now realise, because from personal experience, that the NHS needs massive restructuring. So I think the general public would welcome a Royal Commission, would welcome a proper investigation and restructuring.
Can I ask you about a story which we're going to talk about a little later in the programme, Piers? Nigel Farage is one of many people who now discover he's had his bank account closed down. Coots have refused to say why. There's been serious allegations made against him by Chris Bryant in the Commons which are not true about him taking money from Russia. Dominic Lawson, writing in the Mail today, says that he was barred from his 16-year-old daughter having a bank account. She's got Down syndrome because of her grandfather, the former Chancellor Nigel Lawson. What's going on with banks?
And Dominic's wife, Rosa, her father, who was a Viscount, was also had his account closed. I mean, it's nonsense. And the problem, this comes from over-regulation of banks. Very recently, the head of a major bank told me that he spends 85% of his working time on compliance and governance.
Good Lord.
And there's so many rules, there's so many regulations. The world has become fixated about money laundering. And, of course, don't forget, some of the biggest banks have been fined billions of pounds for their involvement in helping, probably unwittingly, drug cartels in Mexico particularly. And the over-regulation, this over-compliance, it means that banks have become afraid of their own shadow, in fact, afraid of their own customers.
But that would suggest that it's the regulation around the transfer of money which is causing these bank accounts to be closed. And as Nigel has been at pains to point out, in his case, he doesn't know. I think that's the worst thing for me, is that people like Nigel who have their bank accounts closed down, unlike Nigel Lawson's granddaughter, they often don't know the reason.
No.
And that it's like wokeism. This is totalitarian woke culture for me. Your politics don't fit with what our company is happy to be associated with. So we're going to take away your right to spend your money.
Also, it's a question of who within these banks makes these arbitrary decisions. Because I can't believe it's someone very senior, for example, trying to shut the account of a Lawson. I mean, it doesn't make sense to me. But I'm afraid it's over-regulation within banking gone wrong. And this is also having a knock-on effect for the economy because, for example, the London Stock Exchange is suffering from international companies shunning it because of over-regulation from the Financial Conduct Authority particularly. And that makes us less competitive. And when banks are spending the heads of banks are spending 85% of their time on regulation, it surely should tell the world at large this is wrong.
Let's take you to Scotland too, because there'll be some significant interest for you in this. It's the King's Scottish Week, effectively.
Absolutely, yes.
Edinburgh, and they're having the equivalent of the Scottish coronation. Now, of course, you know about the one they had in the 1950s.
That's right. Well, my father organised that for Her late Majesty. And it's going to be a very similar sort of thing.
Why did your father get asked to do that, Piers? Was he...
Because he was a senior civil servant, and had experience of being involved in major events. But this one is going to be quite similar. It's a service of celebration at St Giles Cathedral is the central part of it. There's the being given the keys effectively to Edinburgh, which from the Lord Provost, which is rather nice. And I think it should be a very very positive occasion. Although I'm sure the SNP, one of whom, Minister, has already decried it and saying it's costing too much money. Actually, it's a Green Minister, but it's a Green SNP alliance. It's still a Minister in the Cabinet who really shouldn't have actually spoken out about it. It's really disgraceful. But I think it'll be a terrific occasion. The sort of cloud on the horizon is what we were reading about Orkney, because Orkney, where all my father's family came from, in fact, Pottinger's a very common name there. But although there are only 22,000 people in Orkney, they were originally part of Norway and Denmark. And in fact, it was in the 15th century that the Orkney and Shetland formed part of Queen Margaret's dowry when she married King James III.
I didn't know that.
And it was a present, if you like, a wedding present. And Orkney is very much nearer Oslo than it is Edinburgh or even, obviously, London. And they are looking into whether they might have a look at where they should fit into the economy, because at the moment they are underfunded compared to the Western Isles. And of course they've got terrible ferry problems. Again, this is down to the SNP's total mismanagement.
They're 4 years late, the ferries in Scotland.
Of course, but they're even worse in Orkney because it actually, although it sounds a bit alarming, a bit of the UK maybe disappearing, I think they're quite right to look at it because they need to get funding. I'm afraid it's not really a very viable place. They're already the most heavily subsidised people in the UK. And if they can get more money and more subsidy by being part of someone else, well, you know,
Would it make a nice holiday destination for this summer to go to Orkney?
Wonderful, absolutely
wonderful. There we
wonderful,
go. So we need to go there, spend our money, keep the tourism alive and keep hold of Orkney.
Absolutely.
Very good.
Thank
Piers
you,
Pottinger,
Piers.
always a joy. Always learn something from
I know,
Piers
don't we?
Pottinger,
It's amazing. Let us know your thoughts this morning, won't you, please? gbviews@gbnews.com is the email address. We've got a lot more to come this morning.
Yeah, now President Macron is urging for calm when he meets with mayors from cities impacted by the ongoing riots. It comes after a French firefighter actually died fighting a blaze in an underground car park in a Paris suburb overnight.
157 people were arrested and 3 police officers were injured last night as the family of the teenager whose killing sparked the violence called for an end to the unrest.
Oh, well, look who's here in the studio with us, Mark White, our Home and Security Editor. Mark, I read an amazing, chilling figure today. Last year in France, or Paris, 13 people were shot dead at traffic lights by the police. 13?
Wow.
Yeah.
A record figure, and it's already 3 or 4 this year.
Well,
what's going on?
Yeah, this year, I mean, it's looking better, it's all relative, with only 3 shooting deaths. So this stems from a change in the law in 2018, basically after lots of terrorist outrages that had taken place in France, other incidents where police officers were targeted, in particular an incident in 2018 where a police officer in a suburb was attacked by people throwing Molotov cocktails. He was very badly burnt in that, and the police unions argued that if he'd been able to sort of open fire, then, you know, he might have been in a better place in that sense. So there was a 5-point plan that was set up of scenarios, basically, that the police could open fire of. One of them, one of those scenarios is if in a traffic stop someone refuses to comply, speeds off from your traffic stop, and you believe that yourself or other members of the public are in imminent danger, then they have got potential justification. Everything is subject to an investigation afterwards, of course, but potential justification for opening fire. Now, that change in the law, in the penal code, has been blamed, as you rightly say, for the fact that 13 people have died at traffic stops last year and 3 so far this year.
Is there talk in France that perhaps this law needs to be reviewed?
Possibly, but, you know, the police union in France is very powerful. The French police enjoy a unique position in that country because, you know, we have in this country policing by consent, policing, you know, they are of the people, policing for the people. In France, it's different. You know, they are policing for the government and are seen really as an arm of the state in that sense.
What's going on here, Mark, though? Because probably a tiny number of these people would have known this kid who lost his life.
None of them. I mean,
none of them will know them. So off the back of that one catalytic event, effectively, we're now looking at 6 days of riots, 157 people arrested last night alone. Why? What else is at work here?
This is in the first instance, localised protesting at the death of this young man. You can understand that. If you think back to 2011 and the riots in the UK, similar situation, Mark Duggan on that occasion, shot dead by armed police. You then had a protest, a march to the police station by people outraged at that death. That anger spilled over into rioting in Tottenham. Then we had, in the days that followed, copycat scenarios of young men mainly, fueled up with testosterone and drugs. You know, absolutely, and just, you know, enjoying a good scrap. And it's mindless violence, an opportunist spree of vandalism and violence that was leading to looting and all of the above.
But I mean, they had all those riots with the yellow jackets. Remember earlier? Was that last year? Was it early this year? Can't remember. On weekend after weekend after weekend.
Well, it's certainly true to say that in France there has been a history of people much more willing to indulge in volatile public marches. In this country, most of these demonstrations and marches end in very little violence. In France, if you've got a public demonstration over strikes, Gilets jaunes, the protests that we had recently over pensions reform, most of them end in very violent scenes.
Can I just ask one more quick question? I've got to move on. Have the government in France been talking about bringing in greater measures to curb protests and compromise freedoms off the back of this?
Well, not yet. So they've not said that they will bring in a state of emergency, as some have called for. And maybe the fact that we've had the 6th night of violence, although a firefighter has died, we've still had 157 arrests. It is of a magnitude significantly less than previous nights, so maybe they won't bring in a state of emergency. But if they do, we know in previous years when states of emergencies have been brought in, they've lingered for some considerable time and have impacted on people's personal freedoms.
It's the last thing Macron wants to do in July is the great summer holiday getaway begins. It's the most popular holiday destination on the planet. And if a state of emergency, people think, hey, I'm cancelling my holiday.
And his political rivals on the far right and the far left all making capital on this.
They sneak through legislation, though, as you say, as we've seen it in other countries around the world, also here, to compromise a right in a democracy to protest. That's what worries me. Mark, thank you. We've got to move on. Right, as we just mentioned with Piers, a week of royal engagements will begin today in Scotland, marking the first Hollywood week since the King's coronation.
King Charles will be presented with the honours of Scotland, the oldest crown jewels in Britain, at a service held at St Giles Cathedral.
Let's get the thoughts of the former royal butler, Grant Harold. Good morning, Grant. Good to see you.
Good morning.
So what's going to happen today in Scotland?
Well, the King begins a week of official royal engagements. It's called the Royal Week or the Hollywood Week. And it's quite funny because I remember, obviously, our late Queen undertook this week every year, was one of the duties she undertook. And during the week, it's very much kind of what goes on in London. They have similar things take place. You have a garden party, which again is attended by about 8,000 people. You have a day of investitures, what they do at Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle. So it's very similar to what goes on in London, but it's a chance to do it in Scotland and undertake duties within Scotland and around Scotland. And it's quite sensible to be based there during that week. And of course, most importantly, there's something rather special happening this week as well.
What is that?
It's a Scottish coronation, as it's been described, or the second coronation which is quite unusual because we haven't really had anything quite like this happen. In fact, the last time, I should quite quickly mention, the crown's not going to place, the Scottish crown will not go on the King's head. The last time that happened was in the time of Charles II. However, it's going to be present at a service of Thanksgiving at St Giles's Cathedral. And there's going to be a procession, a fly past, so a much more smaller scale, but still an equivalent to Scotland of a Scottish coronation.
And are we expecting lots of marching and processions, Grant, and lots of people waving flags to see their new king and queen?
Yes. Yeah, I think it's safe to say that that's a definite, Andrew. Well, there's a people's procession, which is hundreds of communities all coming together that are going to go from the castle down to Parliament Square and then obviously to St Giles's. You're going to have the procession of the honours of Scotland, which is the crown. I should mention, as I said, it was used at the coronation of Mary Queen of Scots. It was created by her father, James V. So it's quite an old crown. In fact, it's the oldest crown jewels in the country. You've got the sword of state. I have read that there's going to be a replica used, as the original is quite fragile. And of course, you've got the Stone of Destiny and the sceptre. So they're all going to be present. And you'll have the royal family, the King and Queen, the Duke and Duchess of Rossi, which is the Prince and Princess of Wales. That's how they're known in Scotland. And I'm sure other members of the royal family, I'm sure Princess Anne will also be there, will be in procession going to St Giles Cathedral, where they'll all meet for this service and then return back to Holyrood Palace, which is the official residence of the monarch in Scotland. People get confused between Balmoral and Holyrood. Balmoral is their private home. Holyrood is the official home, and that's where, or palace, I should say, and that's where it will come to climax with a fly past.
And Grant, for the Queen, she always had a particular affection for Scotland and staying at Balmoral, and of course, that's where she was in her last days.
Yes, it was. I mean, Balmoral was always somebody very special and very private to her. That's where she spent a lot of her kind of private time. Traditionally, which is quite interesting, Andrew, because this week, it kind of starts off a whole set of things. I mean, today you've got the ceremony of the keys, which is where the keys of Edinburgh by the Lord Provost is handed to the King. And then after these engagements this week, you would find that in a couple of weeks' time, the Queen would then go to Balmoral, would then move into Balmoral. And it's weird timing. I say weird timing. It's also when you have the Edinburgh Tattoo, the Edinburgh Fringe, all these kind of big celebrations, events take place in Scotland when the Queen would actually arrive. But she would normally head straight to Balmoral, to a lodge on the estate for the first few weeks, which I always thought was quite unique, because there'd be still members of the public going up and visiting Balmoral as she arrived, and then obviously the castle would close for a few weeks to be prepared for her arrival, and then she would move in for a few months. And that's, as far as I'm aware, that's what will happen again this year. But it might be slightly different, because even though the King will be on the Balmoral estate, he quite often goes to Birkhall, which is where he's always gone in the past. So I think everyone's going to be watching closely to see if he continues to use Birkhall, which is what I think he will do, which is where I used to go, or if he might, I think what he might do is any official engagements will see him undertaken at Balmoral Castle.
How do you think he's doing as our new king, Grant, overall?
I think he's doing a really good job. I mean, I was thinking about it the other day, Bev. I mean, you know, he's waited for this job his whole life, and his mother at this point was well and truly in, should I say her, I shouldn't say retirement, but, you know, had been doing this job for quite a few decades, and he's only just started. So, as I've always said, it's big shoes to fill, but he seems to be doing a good job. And the feedback that I'm getting from people is that they're loving what he's doing.
OK. All right, lovely to see you. Former royal butler there,
Thank
Grant
you.
Harold, and that service of dedication and thanksgiving. We're calling it the Scottish coronation on Wednesday. We should have known, we'd have gone.
Could have been lovely.
Oh, we had a lovely time at the last coronation.
And Edinburgh is one of my favourite cities. Love it.
Right, still to come this morning, we're going to be discussing the latest Tory rebellion as Prime Minister Rishi Sunak faces calls from his own MPs for stricter immigration rules. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News, the People's Channel. First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive, because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's 10 a.m. on Monday, the 3rd of July. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Bev Turner and Andrew Lewis.
France has been rocked by a 6th night of protests and riots despite calls for calm, marking a weekend of violence. Thousands arrested, dozens injured. A firefighter lost his life. We'll bring you all the latest throughout the show.
Another Tory rebellion is on the rise. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is facing calls from his own MPs for stricter immigration rules, specifically for care workers, students and refugees.
And it's the viral video provoking outrage for good reason this morning. A Sussex police officer refusing to attend a crime just metres away from a local co-op. We'll play that full video shortly and get your thoughts. And guess what? You're not going to like it.
And we're going to cross over live to Wimbledon this morning to soak up the atmosphere as the 136th Wimbledon Tennis Championships begin today. I think we've got 2 English players today.
Yeah, they'll lose. Don't wish to be unpatriotic, but we're not going to win Wimbledon this year, are we? And of course, we're also talking to a Tory MP who's on the warpath about people who are discovering their bank accounts are being closed down without any explanation. One person, of course, who that affected was our very own Nigel Farage.
That's right. Let us know your thoughts on all our talking points this morning. gbviews@gbnews.com is the email address. But first of all, here are your headlines at 10 a.m. with Tamsin Roberts.
Bev, thank you, and good morning from the GB Newsroom. It's 2 minutes past 10. The British Medical Association says doctors could continue to strike over the next few years if their demands are not met. It comes as junior doctors are planning to stage the largest walkout in the history of the NHS later this month. The 5-day strike action will be from the 13th to the 18th of July. And consultants, the most senior doctors in the NHS, are planning to stage industrial action from the 20th to the 21st of July. Almost 650,000 appointments and operations have been postponed in NHS England due to a wave of strikes. A firefighter has died after a 6th night of violence in France. More than 100 people were arrested after rioters torched cars, looted stores and targeted town halls. 3 police officers were also injured. It follows the death of teenager Nahil Merzouk, who was shot by police in the Paris suburb Nanterre last week. President Emmanuel Macron postponed a state visit to Germany this week to deal with the crisis. France correspondent for The Times, David Chazin, told GB News the reason for the protests.
I think the riots we've seen in recent days has gone beyond just simply protest over the killing of one teenager. I think this reflects a much deeper rage in France's minority communities that young people who may be 4th or even in some cases 5th generation immigrants still feel that they're being treated like second-class citizens, that they're harassed by police.
Ukraine has accused the Kremlin of illegally deporting children into Russia amid the ongoing conflict. Moscow says 700,000 Ukrainian children have found refuge in Russia. The head of the International Committee in Russia's parliament says his country is protecting the orphans fleeing the bombing and shelling. The United States says Moscow is forcibly removing children from their homes. The Foreign Secretary is set to promote a post-Windsor framework future during his visit to Brussels later. James Cleverly is expected to welcome a more mature relationship between the UK and the EU. Mr Cleverly will also stress the importance of continued coordinated support for Ukraine ahead of a meeting with NATO's Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg. The industrial, power and aviation industries will be required to bring their emissions down to reach net zero from next year. Tighter limits will come into force. The UK Emissions Trading System Authority says the decisions will not only put the UK on the path to net zero, but will also support industries to long-term sustainability. It comes as the UK aims to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions by 100% by 2050. Labour claims state schools in England have paid over £8 billion to recruitment agencies since 2010. It comes as the party says it plans to address concerns over the retention and recruitment of teachers and would save taxpayers billions of pounds. The party plans to introduce a new retention payment to encourage teachers to stay in the job after completing the 2-year early career framework. And ahead of teacher strikes in England this week, Shadow Schools Minister Stephen Morgan says the government is failing trade unions.
We know that obviously there will be strike action this week. I think that's a failure of this government not to get round the negotiation table with our trade unions. I think Gillian Keegan should apologise to parents that will face disruption this week. I'm not going to make a commitment on TV today around what we would pay teachers, but the least the Secretary of State could do is to sit round the room with trade unions and negotiate a deal so that we can end the strikes once and for all.
Royal Mail says there have been nearly 2,000 dog attacks on postal workers last year. The company says the figure is up by 14% compared with the previous year. Some postal workers have suffered serious injuries, with one woman needing surgery. The Belfast and Sheffield areas saw the highest rates of attacks. Edinburgh is set for a week of royal engagements as King Charles begins his first Holyrood week since his coronation. And early morning procession rehearsals have been taking place along the Royal Mile. The annual tradition, also known as Royal Week, sees the monarch immersing themselves in Scottish culture and heritage. Later, the King will take part in the ceremony of the Keys, where he will be presented with the keys to the city. This is GB News. More from me shortly. Now, though, it's back to Andrew and Bev.
Well, the Prime Minister's now facing calls from his own party to bring in more immigration cuts ahead of the next election.
About time, really, isn't it? A group of Conservative MPs say the proposed measures would reduce net migration by 400,000 and not cutting migration risks a voter exodus.
Well, let's get the latest on this from GB News political editor Darren McCaffrey, who is in Westminster. Darren, morning. How serious a revolt is this, and how reflective is it of the wider view on the Tory benches that the government really hasn't got to grips with immigration?
Yeah, very good morning to you both. I'd say it's more of a challenge than a revolt, Andrew, but yes, this is clearly a direction that the Prime Minister won't be terribly happy with this morning. As you say, it does somewhat expose the fact that he is struggling with both legal and illegal migration, and that there is concern within the Conservative Party. As you say, this is a group of 2017, 2019, essentially newly elected MPs, if you like, in the grand scheme of things. Lots of them are those red wall Tories, people like Lee Anderson, for example, who's also a vice chair of the Conservative Party, and they're saying this morning that the government needs to do a hell of a lot more to lower net migration. They're talking about trying to reduce the figures from 440,000 to below 226,000 by the time of the next election. Of course, that is still well ahead, even if this was to be committed to, of the tens of thousands that David Cameron and Theresa May used to talk about, but though, let's be honest with, never got anywhere reaching as well. How are this group of Conservative MPs proposing to do that? Well, they're talking about increasing the salary thresholds for migrants who want to come into this country. They feel that at the moment it is too low, that it would limit care worker visas, stop foreign students from staying on after they graduate, and stiffening the language requirements if you want to come and live in this country. They would repeatedly say when they knock on doors, when they talk to voters, migration is still a key issue. Now, clearly this is legal migration. This is different from Stop the Boats, where Rishi Sunak is also struggling with. But as you say, it's not great news at a time which the Prime Minister's had to deal with a series of blows over the last week to have this group of Conservative MPs effectively challenge the government so directly. Those on the other side of the argument will point out and say migration's key to economic growth, and it's also key to sorting out things like NHS waiting lists, that if you're going to limit the number of care workers who can come in here, that's going to have a massive impact, not just, they would say, on the economy, but also on their ability to look after older people.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Darren. Darren McCaffrey there down at Westminster. Well, joining us now in the studio is former Special Advisor to Michael Gove, Charlie Rowley. Charlie, I think some people will be quite relieved to think that there are people within the Conservative Party who have the ear of Rishi Sunak who are telling him, please do something about this.
I think that's right. I think, look, as Darren was saying, this is a long-running issue within the Conservative Party. It goes back to David Cameron's time, where he was sort of talking about getting net migration figures. That's not just illegal migration. That is, as Darren was rightly saying, just migration in general, down to the tens of thousands. Now, if only. Now, clearly, the number has ballooned over the years since because of economic factors, international globalisation, and now we're sort of looking at trying to get on top of that again. But I think the plea that I would say is that I think Darren is also right. It's not a rebellion or a revolt. It's a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, just a little bit of pressure.
But it's making sure that people that have compiled this report know that, or telling the Prime Minister that this is a real issue for people in their constituencies. That's what these MPs are hearing on the doorstep.
Yeah.
And you've got to think at the figures last year, 606,000. That's a major city arrived in this country legally.
Yes, yes, and I think people will be shocked by the figures. But what I think we have to understand is, if anybody that comes into this country who generally is working, and they are working if it's migration, but if they're a student, okay, if they're going to work afterwards, that's absolutely fine. My issue with some of the things I'm hearing from the report, and it's early days, is that when you're talking about care staff, and there are holes in that sector, we need to plug that gap. And
there's thousands of vacancies.
There are thousands of vacancies. And I think, look, if you are that patient in that ward, in that bed, or if you're in a care home and you're not getting the care that you deserve, frankly, I don't think people really care who's providing that treatment. As long as it is good quality care, that's what matters.
And that's because kind of post-Brexit and post-pandemic, there are these special visas, aren't they, which are given to care workers to come and work in our social care sector. I find it quite concerning that that's one of the groups that are being focused upon by this report. MPs, including Miriam Cates, Tom Hunt, are involved
Tom Hunt's coming in to talk to us later in the programme. Yeah.
Should have known that, really, shouldn't I?
Yeah.
So we got him, have we?
Yeah.
That's good. That's worth hanging on for. We can ask him
He's
that
coming
question.
in. We will ask him. We will ask him.
We've had a few changes this morning, but that's good to know. Because surely those are the people we need. I mean, the whole social care sector is in a diabolical mess, isn't it? But we need those people, don't we, Charlie?
We do, and the same with the agricultural sector, same as we do in, building more homes, construction. So we need people into this country to we need people into this country to sort of.
I've talked about this before. In Kent, we've got all these migrants living in hotels. We're going to put some of them in camps. Get them digging up the flipping fruit and vegetables in return for their board and lodge.
I agree.
Why not?
I think it's because of the law needs changing.
We'll change it.
I agree. As soon as you've got a job and you've got money in your pocket,
what if the Tories got a majority, nearly 70? The Labour Party will hate it. Of course they will. But I mean, the Labour Party are going to it'll be open all hours every day when they form the next government. It looks like they will. But that's a constructive way to put these people to use.
I think that's right. And I think what it ultimately comes down is that good old sense of British fairness.
Yeah.
And look, there is no problem if you come into this country legally, if you want to work hard, play by the rules, do the right thing, make a contribution to society, learn the language, integrate with communities. And if you're going to provide care for people, first and foremost, I don't think anybody has a problem with that.
Why should we give them it for nothing?
But precisely, it's the people that come over here, chancing their arm, that are economic migrants, that are skipping the queue, that are not applying in the same way, that are then given the free housing, the social housing, the daily allowance, and that's where it jars with the British public.
But the problem, though, it's about incentive, and if what we're saying is a high proportion of people who are coming here illegally are economic migrants, if they here, not only do you get to the UK, but you get a job, because actually a lot of them want a job. You get a wage.
And ultimately, you know,
it's an incentive.
And it's this government that's introduced the Australian points-based system, so we have absolute control who comes into this country or not. So I think the figures can sometimes be a bit of a red herring, because sometimes you do need more migration to fill these gaps. But ultimately, yes, you want to keep it at a sustainable level.
600,000 people last year, Charlie. A lot of those will be children, so that's a huge impact on schools, huge impact on the NHS. Where's the houses for them? Because we're not building enough houses. Nothing like.
Well, I can't disagree. You know, we do need to build more houses in this country.
Your old boss scrapped the Tory target of 300,000 houses a year, Michael Gove. He scrapped it.
Well, my understanding is that 300,000 homes target is maintained. That is still government policy, and you know, Rachel Maclean, the housing minister, I think is going to try and
I don't
meet
think
that
it
target.
is. I think it's been ditched.
But I think the 300.
Too many of the homes were going to go in Tory areas.
Well, I think being open about it, I think the 300,000 homes target is an underestimation of what we need in this country. You know, we are so far behind. It's not just because of this government. Obviously, it's successive governments have failed to build housing. Tony Blair didn't exactly, and
much worse.
And speaking to some of his advisors, I think that appear on this show, you know, we're absolutely very open with the fact that he just didn't care about housing, Tony Blair.
No.
Look, there's a lot to do in that sector, and it's, you know, we've got to build more homes. You've got to make sure that people that are facing high rents are not priced out. So you need a competitive private rented sector,
they've got to stop putting up interest rates then as well.
Well, and protecting people's mortgages, which is why I think the government's right to work with the banks.
And mortgages moves us beautifully onto banks and the power that banks have to close people's bank accounts. Charlie, Nigel Farage has been talking over the weekend about the fact that his bank account has effectively been closed, and he's applied to various banks who won't have him. Why is this happening, do you think, and why now?
Well, I think that's an absolutely good question for the banks, and they've got a lot to answer. I think Jeremy Hunt in the Daily Mail I was just reading is obviously, I think, going to have a conversation with the banks to say that this is totally disproportionate. You know, of course, it's absolutely right to close somebody's bank account or seize cash if they are a preacher of hate, discrimination, or if it's any illegal shenanigans going on. Of course, the banks have the power to act. Yeah. But in the case of free speech, you know, Nigel Farage is clearly not.
He's described he's a politically exposed person according to the banking regulations, so they've shut it down, and 7 other banks.
He's too powerful.
To clear off.
He's got he's got too powerful. I'm not saying it was winning that tricky war that did it, but it might just have played a part in it.
And Nigel and Dominic Lawson writing in the Mail today, a shocking story that his 16-year-old daughter, who has Down syndrome, Dominica, refused a bank account because of her grandfather being a politically exposed person. Dear old Nigel Lawson.
Yes.
Former Chancellor.
Exactly. And I think...
What, is he into money laundering? Well, he's dead now, anyway.
A polite message to the banks to be that you should just stick to banking and, you know, look after people's funds, manage the money properly.
Well, Piers Bosage said at the beginning that he talks to a bank manager, 85% of his time is to do with regulation and compliance.
This is ESG, though, Charlie. Surely this is your environmental, your social governance. This is the corporations which suddenly have this rather left-wing kind of attitude, actually, towards the fact that they have to all agree. There is no room for dissent. Everybody agrees that climate change is bad, and that, you know, this eco-zealotry, and it ties into the gender politics across the board. They're a very powerful organisation. In fact, Priti Patel tweeted about it over the weekend. She said there are very powerful forces at work within these corporations who are dictating the political agenda quietly behind the scenes. For me, Nigel having his bank account cancelled is part of that. How do we stop it?
Totally. And I think that, well, the biggest thing that I think anybody can do, and the biggest demonstration, is to say that, look, you know, as a global bank or whoever, you can say people have a right to free speech. You know, this is Britain. You know, this is the United Kingdom. You might not agree with what somebody has to say, but you'd absolutely defend their right to say it. I won't agree with Nigel Farage all of the time. I might not agree with, I think there was a vicar that was targeted as well.
He objected to the fact the bank had too many freedom flags and gay pride flags.
Sure, and, you know, you might think he's right.
A vicar.
You might think he's wrong, but he's a vicar, for goodness sake.
Yeah.
And the idea that a local bank or a bank branch or would have reported something up to whoever gave the order to say, well, shut them down, I think is a race to the bottom. It is just an atrocity, really. It is terrifying.
Yeah,
it really is.
It is, and I think it's terrible. Kay Burley from Sky News was tweeting over the weekend, effectively sort of saying, well, you know, people don't like your opinions. Like, where is the journalism gone in this country? Why don't we have the answers? For me, the most chilling part is the fact that they don't give an explanation. If it is a political position as a bank, own it. Have at least the cojones to say, we don't like your politics, and then at least the customers of that bank know where you stand, and then if they choose to withdraw their money, then they can.
Because I always find in situations like this, when you have these big grandstanding decisions, whether it's shutting a bank or whether it's complying to a groupthink sort of woke agenda, it's always a silent majority of people that
it's fear.
Exactly.
It's fear. Charlie, good to see you.
Love to talk to you, Charlie. Yeah.
Right, still to come, a firefighter died after another night of violence across France. We're going to bring you the developments next. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think. Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views, and often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
President Macron's meeting mayors of various cities impacted by the riots today, appealing for calm. It comes after a French firefighter died fighting a blaze in an underground car park in a Paris suburb overnight.
So 157 people were arrested, 3 police officers were injured as the family of the teenager whose killing sparked the violence calls for the end of the unrest.
Well, our Home Security Editor, Mark White, joins us now. Mark, it's all relative, but it is relatively calmer than it was.
Yeah, still 157 arrests, as you were mentioning there, 350 buildings that were set on fire and 300 odd vehicles that were burnt out in towns right across France. So the positives to take from it are, though, that it was much calmer in Paris and certainly down in the southern city of Marseille, France's second city, where there were 2 nights of very extreme violence there, but less so last night. But of course, that very worrying development of the firefighter who died while fighting those cars set on fire in the underground car park.
An excuse to smash up the place?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Sadly, it's a pattern that we see with these protests where there's perhaps, justifiable outrage or at least understandable outrage following an event, but that snowballs, it gets copied by those who have no connection with any of the people involved in a certain tragedy, but have decided that they want to go out and, have a ruck with the police, loot and vandalise and set things alight. And, it just has a momentum of its own, which can be very, very difficult to stop. But having said that, you also have a situation where normally after about a week, even the scroats get a bit tired and decide, they want to rest for a while.
Yeah.
Whether it will flare up again, we don't know. We have to hope it won't.
It was clearly a tinderbox waiting to go off, Mark, at the moment, wasn't it, in France? But so what else is happening politically in the background? What have been the cumulative effects? I guess they're suffering like we are. Inflation, lower wages, people can't make ends meet. That's all played into this, I guess.
Yes, more broadly and more specifically with regard to the immigrant community, in particular the North African community in Paris and many other big city suburbs, in Marseille, for instance. There is a feeling amongst people in those communities that they are second-class citizens, that they find it much more difficult to get jobs, to get opportunities, they believe that they are targeted by the police on a regular basis, discriminated against. There is seething resentment in what are effectively ghettos. It's different in this country, that we don't have many ghettos as such. There is better integration here, although there are still concerns in this country. But compared to France, it's very, very different here.
The teenager who was shot dead, he was Algerian descent. His mother is saying, stop this now, stop wrecking our neighbourhoods. They burnt down a state-of-the-art library, 180,000 books destroyed. I mean, What's the point?
Yeah, they are saying that, but having said that, the grandmother, while saying she doesn't want any more violence, is calling for more protests to try to get this controversial law which allows police to open fire in a range of different scenarios repealed. So what we know with France is anytime you get a march or a protest, you'll normally get an escalation into violent scenes. Having said that, we've got another protest that's planned today in the suburb of Paris, the southern suburb, where this mayor's house was targeted and his wife injured in that, and the children clearly very traumatised as they fled the house where a car was rammed into the front of that house on fire. There is a counter-protest, let's call it that, that's going to take place at the town hall with those who want to support the mayor and call for an end to the violence. But as I say, the difficulty of any protest, counter-protest or the general protest, it can result in very significant security concerns.
We're moving into the summer now. Lots of Brits will be wanting to go to France on holiday. They'll have tickets booked. Do you think this should affect their plans, Mark?
Well, it's interesting. We were looking at, the Eurostar and train fares and the like to France, and they're all booked out still. People are still going. I think the advice really is just to follow the guidance from the Foreign Office, which is not saying don't travel to France, but just to be mindful of what's going on and take the adequate precautions. Because we saw in the likes of Marseille a lot of violence, even in the tourist areas. And in Paris as well, we saw some rioting that actually got right into the city centre, areas around the Arc de Triomphe and the Champs-Élysées as well.
It's an international city. It's a very bad look, and Macron looks very weak, the president who's meeting the mayors today.
Yeah, and he is facing calls from the right to implement a state of emergency. He's facing criticism from the left regarding policies and the integration of immigrant communities or non-integration into French society. Yeah, it's a mess. I mean, he had just really recovered from a period where there were sustained protests and violence over pension reforms and, a few weeks of calm, and now we're into this.
He didn't help himself, did he, by being seen jigging away at an Elton John concert while Paris was in flames?
Well, that was a very bad look.
Very bad look. And he was a very bad dancer as well,
yeah, it was 2 nights into the rioting, so...
What was he thinking of?
Yeah.
While
a bad optic.
While parts of Paris were in flames, he was, in another part of Paris, seemingly enjoying himself and carefree. I'm sure he would argue
Hopefully
he wasn't.
not celebrating so he can push in more laws to stop protests. That's my worry.
Well, that's certainly a possibility.
Always on the horizon.
Yeah.
Right, thank you, Mark. OK, still to come. It is the first Hollywood week since Charles became king, and our very own Cameron Walker is in Edinburgh. You're jealous. You wish you were there.
Yeah, I'd love to be there.
That's all after your morning news is finished.
Bev, thanks very much. Good morning from the GB Newsroom. Here are the headlines at 10:30. The British Medical Association says doctors could continue to strike over the next few years if their demands are not met. It comes as junior doctors are planning to stage the largest walkout in the history of the NHS later this month. The 5-day strike action will be from the 13th to the 18th of July. And consultants, the most senior doctors in the NHS, are planning to stage industrial action from the 20th to the 21st of July. Almost 650,000 appointments and operations have been postponed in the NHS in England due to a wave of strikes. NUS workers have been locked in a long-running dispute with the government over pay and conditions. NHS, excuse me. A firefighter has died after a 6th night of violence in France. More than 100 people were arrested after rioters torched cars, looted stores and targeted town halls. 3 police officers were also injured. It follows the death of teenager Nahel Mazouk, who was shot by police in the Paris suburb Nanterre last week. President Emmanuel Macron has postponed a state visit to Germany this week to deal with the crisis. Ukraine has accused the Kremlin of illegally deporting children into Russia amid the ongoing conflict. Moscow says 700,000 Ukrainian children have found refuge in Russia. The head of the International Committee in Russia's parliament says his country is protecting the orphans fleeing the bombing and shelling. The United States says Moscow is forcibly removing children from their homes. Labour claims state schools in England have paid over £8 billion to recruitment agencies since 2010. It comes as the party says it plans to address concerns over the retention and recruitment of teachers, which would save taxpayers billions of pounds. The party plans to introduce a new retention payment to encourage teachers to stay in the job after completing the 2-year early career framework. Well, you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com. Now, though, it's back to Andrew and Bev.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Over to Andrew and Bev in just a moment. Before that, here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2674 at 1.1639 euros. The price of gold is £1,510 and 11 pence per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,550 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing. We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com? You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, thank you for joining Britain's Newsroom on GB News. So a royal week of engagements will begin today in Scotland, marking the first Hollywood week since King Charles's coronation.
So the King's going to be presented with the honours of Scotland, the oldest crown jewels in Britain, we're not talking about the King there, at a service held at St Giles Cathedral.
So joining us now is our royal correspondent, Cameron Walker. Good morning, Cameron.
Good morning, Bev. Well, it's Royal Week once again. It's an annual tradition where the monarch spends a week in the capital city of Scotland and is in residence at the Palace of Holyrood House, which is behind me. And I was stood here this time last year, and it was the late Queen, Elizabeth II, who took what turned out to be some of her final public engagements before she went up to Balmoral to retire for the summer. And one of those engagements is what's happening today, and that is the ceremony of the keys, where the King will be officially welcomed to the city of Edinburgh and his ancient and hereditary Kingdom of Scotland by the Lord Provost of the city, which is a bit like a ceremonial mayor. And then the King will entrust the keys back to him because, and I quote what the King will say, it will be placed in better hands than those of, they cannot be placed in better hands than the Lord Provost and councillors of my good city of Edinburgh. It's all very ceremonial, pomp and pageantry, as we have seen really quite a lot in the last couple of months. A guard of honour will be provided for the King, and there will be music provided by the band of the Royal Regiment of Scotland as well. But celebrations do not end there. The King is going to be returning for what could be perhaps a bit of a nostalgic trip for him to the Royal Yacht Britannia, that famous ship beloved by the late Queen and members of the royal family. Nearly 1,000 state visits it transported the royal family to around the world. It travelled more than 1 million nautical miles when it was in active service from the 1950s to 1997 when it was decommissioned. But since then, it sat in Leith in Edinburgh and it's become a tourist attraction. 6.5 million tourists have visited this famous ship since it's been docked there in 1998. And when it was decommissioned in 97, it was one of the only times where the late Queen had visibly shown emotion in public. And the King will be going there later on today for a reception. But of course, it's very historic, his trip to Edinburgh this time, because the honours of Scotland will be presented to him on Wednesday in St Giles Cathedral. There's going to be a big procession of the oldest crown jewels in Britain from Edinburgh Castle down to St Giles Cathedral. And from here behind me at the Palace of Holyrood, the King, the Queen and the Prince and Princess of Wales, known as the Duke and Duchess of Rothesay in Scotland, will process up to St Giles Cathedral for a service of thanksgiving celebrating the King's coronation in Scotland. And of course there are several other engagements which are going to be happening this week, so make sure you stay tuned in to GB News for the very latest.
We wouldn't miss a bit of it.
Cameron. Lucky you. The oldest crown jewels are going to be on display. We're all very excited about that now then.
Exactly.
Stop sniggering all. Sarah Vine is here with us, of course, Daily Mail columnist and political commentator.
That is no way to refer to our king.
I know. We all need to grow up a little bit.
Yeah, we do.
Right, here's a story. I want to show this clip. We've been talking about this morning. We're dying to see this. This is a film on social media, ladies, that was filmed of a police officer. I think it's self-explanatory, refusing to attend a crime. Have a look at this.
Right, you need to get around to the co-op. Honestly, there's just been a fight round there because people are trying to stop the shoplifters that you're doing nothing about. There's a member of the public just been assaulted by a 15-year-old girl who's drunk, had a drink thrown in her face, got punched. People have called the police. We come round here and you're sitting here. I know you're not, but the sight of the car will make them scatter. And you're afraid to deal with it then? It kind of is the point. That's the perception. That's just cowardice. No, it is. I'm afraid it is. This is the whole reason these problems exist. That's a pretty poor attitude, I'm afraid. Wow, that's disappointing.
Well, that man deserves a medal for highlighting what's going on, I suspect, more and more with the police.
I think he should join the police immediately.
He should. We have contacted Sussex Police, by the way, to get a response. So far, guess what? They haven't come up with any response.
I love that the policeman saying, I'm not a
response unit.
So basically, computer says no.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't tick the right boxes, therefore I'm not going to do it. And also, since when are policemen scared of 15-year-old girls?
Yeah, exactly.
It's also, you can almost hear it in that guy's voice that was filming it, Bushra. It's about fear. It's about the fear of knowing there's a crime being committed around the corner and you're seeing a police officer in a car and he's saying, not my job.
Yeah, not me, Gov.
It's sad. It's sad. I mean, one of the things I was tackling with this was the fact that he said he's a police community support officer.
What does that mean?
So what does that mean? So is that, you know, and certainly this needs to be investigated, and I know that they are, because
it may be that he's not. It may be that I mean, they're a sort of subsection of the police, and it may be. I'm not saying that this is the case, but it may be that he's not insured, or that he's not got the right equipment, or that if he does it, he'll get into trouble.
It's what it says in police community support officer. You're there to support the community. There is a crime taking place in your community. Go and support the community.
And it's very simple. He could have just driven the car in eyesight, so people see the police car, know, and they will scatter. God, people are scared of that. So this has surprised me. This is actually quite frightening.
It is
frightening. But also, is it any wonder that the public are taking matters into their own hands? Because if they ask a policeman to help and he won't, then what else are you supposed to do? I mean, we see this with the Just Stop Oil protesters.
Yeah.
You know, police just stand there chatting to them about, I don't know, whatever it is they've done for the weekend and dancing around. And real people are just, can you just do your job?
Yeah, and we've seen people get out of their lorries, drag the protesters off the street, and then they get handcuffed. The lorry drivers get handcuffed, even though they're trying to. There's a crisis in policing, I think, at Bushra. A crisis of confidence in it.
Definitely, and I think the public are going to step up a lot more and think they're going to have to take things into their own hands. I was thinking to myself that if this situation was more of a worse situation and it was a young woman or something was involved, and he still did nothing, that it's awful.
But do you remember, I mean, we're old enough, Bushra, not you, but do you remember in the 80s when New York was completely out of control and the public took matters into their own hands and they started basically running...
They had vigilantes.
Basically, vigilante groups, because people were being attacked and the police were not doing anything.
Yeah.
But that's what happens if you have a long...
And it started briefly here, if you remember. They operated on the tubes.
Yeah, they did. I remember, because I used to go on the tube all the time in those days, and it was... Back then, you could smoke on the tube.
Yeah, you could.
But it was, the tube was quite scary, and it was, you'd see them, and that was really good because you knew that there was no recourse.
And you often see in whatever part of I live in North London, I often see a private security vehicle patrolling streets. They're obviously being paid by local people because they don't have confidence there's ever going to be a copper walking past the house. I haven't seen a Bobby on the beat for years.
I mean, I lost all of my faith in the police many years back when I had an incident with my children, and they did absolutely nothing. It was the most frightening time I've never experienced. I had somebody trying to ram me off the road, and I had my son, who was 11 years old, on the phone to the police to say that people are trying to ram my mum off this road. And it was awful because there were other cars as well, and they did nothing, absolutely nothing. I had the plate of the car, and this went on for about 30 minutes with them on the telephone, and nobody was sent, and I had 2 children in the car. It was awful.
It's awful. We don't want to depress you too much this morning. But it's hard to find any sort of positive in there because you don't feel that there's an adult in the room. Is there making any changes? Sarah Vine, you are probably a politically exposed person.
Yes.
Are you worried about your bank account?
Yes, I am, actually, I have to say. Although my bank does ring me up once a year and we have a politically exposed chat.
That's nice.
and they say, have you been doing any money laundering? I say, no, not recently. We had that conversation.
Serious?
No, they do. They have to do it. It's part of compliance.
When you were married to Michael Gove, or even now, as a
when I was married to Michael, but also now still, because I think, just by association. This is an interesting story. So this week, this is the Nigel Farage story, who's had his bank accounts withdrawn after 40 years with the same bank.
No
which
explanation.
Is extraordinary. And also, as Bushra and I were saying to each other earlier on, the fact is, if you don't have a bank account, you cannot function in society anymore. No. You are basically depriving someone of their basic human rights. And I would question whether it's legal at all as well. I don't know. I mean, I'm not an expert, but I imagine... is it legal?
I think it clearly is. I suppose they're providing a private commercial service.
Yeah.
And they have a right to withdraw.
But this bank, remember,
this story is my colleague, our brilliant colleague, Dominic
Yeah.
Lawson,
Yeah.
whose daughter has Down syndrome. And when they tried to open a bank account for her with Barclays when she was 16, they were told that they couldn't because her grandfather, of course, was Nigel Lawson. So therefore she was a politically exposed person. This is a person with Down syndrome.
Yeah.
So the idea that they could be involved in some sort of nefarious money laundering,
Yeah.
I mean, it's just the lack of common sense is extraordinary in these things.
And then when they tried another bank account, it was stopped because Rosa, his wife's brother, is a Viscount.
Yeah.
So that made him politically. He hasn't sat in the House of Lords ever.
Yeah.
But I guess the idea that you're politically exposed means that you're what? You might be vulnerable to blackmail.
It was a sort of law that was brought in, I think, in the 80s, late 80s, to try and stop. To force banks to check people who had political connections to make sure they weren't engaging in corrupt activities.
But then then surely business people are engaged in corrupt activities.
Well, all sorts of. I mean, also, I do think there's something here to say about the banks passing moral judgment on people, given that they crashed the world economy in 2008 by just basically.
And this particular bank, Coutts, is part of NatWest, which is still partly state-owned by the taxpayer because they made such a hash of it.
Yeah.
What do you think's going on here, Bushra, with Nigel particularly?
Nigel's not the first. This has been happening to people for decades. They've just not spoken out about it. I haven't had any personal experiences myself, but I know people that have had immense struggles within the banking industry, and they've had to move bank to bank to bank to bank.
It would be terrible.
And it's awful. But then in the same breath, I have a history of working in the banking system, so I know how serious it is to understand that fraud is very big, the laundering of money is huge. But the truth is, the people that are actually laundering the money and not the people that are targeted. It's usually the people that are sort of sat in the middle, that might have the political affiliation. They're not targeting the people that they really need to target. But like Sarah and I said, there needs to be a basic level of banking that's available to everyone at any point, regardless.
But I wonder if this is happening to people who are politically on the left.
It's the low-hanging fruit thing. We've got to tick a certain number of boxes.
Yeah.
We've got to say that we've done this, we've done the compliance.
Yeah.
And so they go for the easy people. And I think with Nigel, they just sort of messed up because he's not. But
he tried. Another bank
to get the bank account for Domenica because the bank manager that she knew was a sort of this is the problem. We've taken all humans out of this process.
Well, and it's very unusual to find a bank.
Yeah.
You know, they're closing the banks.
Shall we... I'm not quite sure quite how much time we've got. I think we've got time for another one. Sarah, this is a change to the way that we dispose of our dead. The biggest change in 100 years. That we've now got on offer these aquamations, not just a burial, not just a cremation, but dissolving the body in fluids and water, a water funeral. I quite like the idea of
I'm
that.
sure if you're dissolving the body, there has to be a certain amount of acid in the water. I'm not very
it's
technical.
Not quite. They don't get jet washed.
Yes, exactly. It's not just a sort of. But I mean, I think the way we dispose of bodies is quite interesting. I've always felt rather uncomfortable with the idea of a cremation, but I know that
a burial.
Well, yes, I sort of. I don't know, but then I'll be dead, so it won't matter.
All those worms and things.
Well, I know, but it's organic matter. I can just go and become a tree in a graveyard. I'd rather do that sort of.
But do you go to graveyards of people you know and love and
I do.
lay
I also,
flowers
because
and things?
I'm obsessed with yew trees, so I go to graveyards anyway to look at yew trees.
Okay.
Because yew trees are beautiful and they always grow, but they're always planted in graveyards.
See, I want to be cremated because it's quicker, cheaper.
Well, I did,
and
but I
done.
love water, so I quite.
water's a nice
like the
idea.
idea of this.
I mean, people are allowed to have what they want. I mean, I'm like you, Sarah. I prefer going to the ground. I prefer this idea of going back into the earth and leaving that way. But I think this is more about the space. Perhaps there's not enough space to bury everyone, and it's about the planet as well. And this is actually a good idea. It has been done before.
Sorry to
We've got some breaking news here. It's that woman, Sue Gray, remember her? The former civil servant. She broke the Civil Service Code as a result of the undeclared contact between her and the Labour Party, according to a Cabinet Office investigation.
Ms Gray was cleared last week by the Advisory Committee on Business Appointments to start work as Sir Keir Starmer's Chief of Staff in September. If you remember, after the anti-corruption watchdog ruled it had seen no evidence that her decision-making or impartiality was impaired whilst serving in Whitehall.
I'm astonished by this because normally you'd expect there to be, Sarah, you bring you in on this, at least a 2-year gap before standing down from a very sensitive civil service post.
I was having this conversation with somebody in number 10 about this morning, and there is no requirement. When Ed Llewellyn joined David Cameron's office as Chief of Staff, he came straight from the civil service, and so there is just no requirement. I think this is a flaw in the system, really. I think there should be a sort of kind of dignified cooling down period of maybe 2 years before you can take a political appointment if you're a civil servant.
So she was talking to Sir Keir Starmer about doing this job at the very time she had access to all sorts of
and she was
privileged
in charge
information.
Of the Partygate
and she was doing the Partygate investigation, allowing Boris now to say, see, it was a political stitch-up from beginning to end.
Yeah. But isn't there something about 6 months before she actually has the appointments? So there is a 6-month gap.
There's a 6-month gap.
So, I mean, 2 years, 6 months?
Well, the thing is that Sue Gray, is privy to so much really sensitive information.
Yeah.
I mean, she really
knows everything.
She does know where the bodies are buried. And the fact that she is crossing so clearly to the other side, I think just makes people feel uncomfortable. I mean, as I said, technically she's done nothing wrong, but I think the problem is with the sort of process, really.
Yeah.
I think Jonathan Powell went to work for Blair, and he didn't. He was a civil servant.
Because he was in Washington,
exactly,
wasn't he?
Yeah.
She apparently flatly refused to cooperate with the investigation. Had nothing to do with it. Well, she got away with it.
Right, Bushra, colleagues on duty at Pride were told they couldn't wear the thin blue line emblem. Why?
I find
this is the little Union Jack, the dark blue Union Jack.
Yeah, apparently it's because it's associated with a right-wing party in America and it might upset the trans lobby or the trans movement. And it's ridiculous.
Who knew that?
Like, these are about fallen officers. This is about them. It's not about the trans community.
You have to get on everything.
Exactly. I almost feel like, why are we at this stage? We're always so concerned about upsetting this group. You know, they're protected so much. And I just feel like, no, they should have been allowed to do that and allowed to have a symbol.
They should have worn it anyway.
Exactly.
And then be disciplined.
And then get told off after it.
Yeah.
This was a Mail on Sunday story.
It was.
Yeah. Splash yesterday. No, I agree. I think it's... I mean, the problem is I think they're so worried about offending any of... And it was obviously the Pride stuff at the weekend. I mean, you know, because people can get very... It's amazing how quickly people can get carried away with the wrong end of the stick these days, and things can turn really nasty. So, I mean, I can understand why they were doing it as a sort of preventative measure, but it is wrong. It's not fair.
And just to be clear, this is a tiny little...
Yeah, you'd hardly even notice it.
...flag, but it's in dark blue and a sort of royal blue.
It's very subtle.
It represents police officers who died in the name of in their job. And the trans organiser said that this had no place on the uniforms of the officers at the Pride event.
Yeah.
It's just bullying. By any definition, it's just bullying.
Yeah. And it's, you know, this is something that we have to really consider now, because whatever you're going to allow today is going to be the benchmark for tomorrow.
Yes.
And if you're saying yes to this stuff now and saying, no, you cannot have these emblems, actually, it's a good emblem to have. And it is tiny. You can barely see it. So the fact that you're saying, actually, you're not going to be allowed to do this means, what is it going to look like for us as a community tomorrow?
So the sensitivities of a very tiny lobby win over...
Well, it's like the story about the Bank of England, isn't it?
...to people who've fallen.
It's the same, isn't it?
Yeah.
So the Bank of England have said that they've changed all the kind of advice in their literature to say that basically any gender can be pregnant.
Oh, yes. In fact, we're going to go on to... We'll talk about that in a bit more detail when you're next in the next hour, ladies. Thank you.
Do you think we'll ever go through a week when we won't talk about the trans community and gender?
I'd like to. Right, in the next few moments, we're going to be joined by Tory MP Tom Hunt. He is one of the MPs who is urging Rishi Sunak to dramatically cut migration numbers. More to come on that in the next hour with GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton Tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
It's 11 o'clock on Monday, the 3rd of July. This is GB Newsroom from GB News, Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
Thank you for joining us this morning. Now, France has been rocked by a 6th night of protests and riots, despite calls for a calm, marking a weekend of violence as thousands were arrested and dozens injured. We'll bring you the latest throughout the show.
Another Tory rebellion. This time it's on immigration. The Prime Minister under pressure from his own MPs for stricter rules for care workers, students and refugees. Tom Hunt, one of those MPs, is joining us in the studio shortly.
And it's a disturbing new banking trend. The accounts of prominent individuals are being shut down. We're going to be speaking to Tory MP Sir Charles Walker about this disturbing push from banks to shut down the accounts of prominent political individuals. Keep your views coming this morning, won't you, as well? gbnews@gbnews.com is the email address. But first of all, here are your news headlines with Tamsin Roberts.
Thanks very much, Bev. Good morning from the GB Newsroom at 1 minute past 11. The British Medical Association says doctors could continue to strike over the next few years if their demands are not met. It comes as junior doctors are planning to stage the largest walkout in the history of the NHS later this month. The 5-day strike action will be from the 13th to the 18th of July. Consultants are planning to stage industrial action also from the 20th to the 21st of July. Almost 650,000 appointments and operations have been postponed in the NHS in England since a widespread disruption started late last year. NHS workers have been locked in a long-running dispute with the government over pay and conditions. Train drivers are set to stage another week of refusing to work overtime as part of their ongoing pay dispute. ASLEF says its members at 15 train operators will take part in the ban from the 17th to the 22nd of July. The action follows a week of long overtime ban at 16 train operators, which began today and will go on until the 8th of July. A Cabinet Office investigation has found former senior civil servant Sue Gray broke the Civil Service Code as a result of undeclared contact between herself and the Labour Party. Miss Gray led the investigation into lockdown-breaking gatherings in Downing Street. She was cleared last week by the Advisory Committee on Business Appointments to start work as Sir Keir Starmer's Chief of Staff in September. The anti-corruption watchdog ruled it had seen no evidence that her decision-making or impartiality was impaired while serving in Whitehall. Teachers in England are due to strike this week after they rejected a 4.5% pay rise from the government. It comes as the Labour Party says its plan to address concerns over the retention and recruitment of teachers, which would save taxpayers billions of pounds. The party says it plans to introduce a new payment to encourage teacher recruitment and keep existing educators after completing the 2-year early career framework. Shadow Schools Minister Stephen Morgan says the government is failing trade unions.
We know that obviously there will be strike action this week. I think that's a failure of this government not to get round the negotiation table with our trade unions. I think Gillian Keegan should apologise to parents that will face disruption this week. I'm not going to make a commitment on TV today around what we would pay teachers, but the least the Secretary of State could do is to sit round the room with trade unions and negotiate a deal so that we can end the strikes once and for all.
A firefighter has died after a 6th night of violence in France. More than 100 people were arrested after rioters torched cars, looted stores and targeted town halls. 3 police officers were also injured. It follows the death of teenager Nahel Merzouk, who was shot by police in the Paris suburb Nanterre last week. President Emmanuel Macron postponed a state visit to Germany this week to deal with the crisis. France correspondent for The Times, David Chazan, says the protests reflect deep-rooted problems in the country.
I think the riots we've seen in recent days has gone beyond just simply protest over the killing of one teenager. I think this reflects a much deeper rage in France's minority communities that young people who may be 4th or even in some cases 5th generation immigrants still feel that they're being treated like second-class citizens, that they're harassed by police.
Ukraine has accused the Kremlin of illegally deporting children into Russia amid the ongoing conflict. Moscow says 700,000 Ukrainian children have found refuge in Russia. The head of the International Committee in Russia's parliament says his country is protecting the orphans fleeing the bombing and shelling. The United States says Moscow is forcibly removing children from their homes. Royal Mail says there have been nearly 2,000 dog attacks on postal workers last year. The company says the figure is up by 14% compared with the previous year. Some postal workers have suffered serious injuries, with one needing surgery. The Belfast and Sheffield areas saw the highest rates of dog attacks. Edinburgh is set for a week of royal engagements as King Charles begins his first Holyrood week since his coronation. An early morning procession rehearsal was taking place along the Royal Mile. The annual tradition, also known as Royal Week, sees the monarch immersing themselves in Scottish culture and heritage. Later, the King will take part in the ceremony of the Keys, where he'll be presented with the keys to the city. This is GB News. More from me shortly. Now, though, it's back to Andrew and Bev.
Prime Minister's facing calls from his own party to implement more immigration cuts ahead of the next election. And
That's right.
Get on with it.
A group of Conservative MPs say the proposed measures would reduce net migration by 400,000 and not cutting migration risks a voter exodus.
And the author of the report is in the studio with us. He is Tom Hunt. He's the Conservative MP for Ipswich. 400,000 a year. Well, that's pretty good going because last year legal migration was 606,000. That's the equivalent of a major city coming in every year with no provision for housing, NHS, schools, infrastructure. It's disastrous.
I think this is largely about, looking at that 2019 manifesto. We stood in a manifesto saying that we would bring down net migration. It was, at the time, it was around sort of 220,000, and we said we'd bring it down. It's now gone up significantly. This plan that we've published today is a pathway to us getting back on track. It's a pathway to us ahead of the next general election getting just below that figure it stood at 2019, which I still say is too high. But I think it's stage one in rebuilding that trust with the public on this issue.
It's about 20 signatories on this report of all Conservative MPs. Why are you having to put such pressure on the leadership when it is a vote winner? Because we see it time and time again that reducing immigration is at the top of the list of the things that people are concerned about. Precisely from what Andrew said about the lack of services to provide for people. Why are you having to do this?
Well, I don't think it's, we've ended EU free movement for the first time in a huge amount of time. We've now got control of our legal migration system. Good news. It's a good news that we can actually have this debate, because actually when we were in the EU and we had EU free movement, this debate would be pointless. So at least we can actually have this debate. So that's something which I think the government deserves credit for. And actually, the Prime Minister has prioritised illegal migration, one of his 5 priorities, and also him and the Home Secretary have said that the numbers are too high, we're going to come down. Already done some things, for example, on student dependence. It's got to come down significantly by the next general election. I think it's fair enough, that the current figure does take into account the Ukrainian and the Hong Kong refugees, but even taking that into account, it's still far too high.
Yeah, and the students, how on earth we allowed these students to come in and then bring all their dependents in? I mean, how many years has that been going on?
Well, one of the things in our report. OK, we'll go ahead with that. But if you're going to come in and to an underperforming university, studying a degree of very little value to our country, and then bring your entire family with you as well, that is something that... And also the fact that once you finish your degree course, you can hang around for 2 or 3 years afterwards, even if you haven't got a job. I mean, that clearly is not the right thing. So the government have already made some big moves in this. We're going further. We're suggesting more movement.
Tom, I think what is a little controversial maybe in the report is that you want to cut down on the visas for care workers. We need more care workers, don't we?
Well, I mean, I think that that would be gradual, but I think it's important that we realise that there's 30,000 young people currently studying for BTECs in health and social care. We have a large number of people in this country economically inactive. We shouldn't be dependent upon cheap labour from abroad when it comes to our care sector. But we have to address some fundamental points about our education system. Why has it failed so dramatically to fill so many skill shortages? So we are dependent upon cheap labour from abroad. So, what the government suggested on student dependence, it would be done maybe slightly gradually, but it does need to happen. It does need to happen. That visa with an income threshold far lower than the average income threshold for coming to the country was introduced on a temporary basis during the pandemic. We're just bringing that to an end.
If the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary don't get to grips with this immigration issue, I think it's terminal for the Conservative Party at the next election.
Look, I mean,
The New Conservative group, we're called New Conservatives because we are literally New Conservatives. We're Conservatives elected in 2017 and 2019 after that Brexit referendum. Many of us represent constituencies that were never previously represented by Conservative MPs. And to many of those voters, immigration is a number one or number two issue. It's a huge issue for them. Many of these voters can also see how immigration, it impacts many of the other issues, public services, housing, rapid social and cultural change. So, no, I agree. We've got to, we've got control of the immigration system. We can have this debate, but we've got to bring numbers down to sustainable levels. Ipswich, where I represent, I think over the last 40, 50 years, in many respects, has benefited from immigration. But that was when it was at sustainable levels. I think what we've seen more recently has been numbers that are unsustainable. And that's a shame. We want to benefit from immigration at sustainable levels, but at managed levels. And what we've seen, I think, and it was ushered in by the last Labour government, we need to be more robust and pushing back about what was introduced by the last Labour government.
Your constituency of Ipswich, what does your Labour opposition feel about this?
Well, I know what he feels about illegal migration. We've got a hotel in the town centre in Ipswich filled up with illegal migrants. My opponent...
They crossed the channel.
Who illegally entered this country via a safe country, which is called France.
Yes.
My Labour opponent, before he was elected, made multiple trips to the Calais camp where he appeared to be actively encouraging illegal migration. Recently, we had a protest against the use of the hotel. He went to the counter-protest.
So this is Jack Abbott.
That's his name, with a huge megaphone, surrounded by a load of people with sort of banners to equivalent of all borders are racist. So this is... and ultimately, I do get frustrated that, over the last decade, the Conservative Party haven't done more on this issue, but I still get up, I still knock on doors, and I will always tell people to vote Conservative, because the alternative, the Labour Party, we may as well just give up, frankly. If the Labour Party get in on this issue, we may as well just give up on illegal migration, but also on legal migration as well.
What's the response from Number 10 and ministers to this report, Tom? What have they said to you?
Well, I think the sort of the Home Office on this issue, I think they'd agree with a large amount of it, and I think so will Number 10.
The Home Secretary would certainly agree with it.
What's ever so slightly frustrating is I think it's healthy that this debate's going on in the Conservative Party. I think it's healthy that we're having that debate. These are 12 proposals that are I think good proposals. And sometimes in the media, this has sort of been written up as a blow to the Prime Minister and everything else. It's certainly not. We are supporters of the Prime Minister.
Yeah.
I backed the Prime Minister to become Prime Minister. I'm very pleased with his stance on illegal migration, and I've got confidence over time he will deliver results on that.
Yeah.
So, look, this isn't designed to undermine anyone. This is designed to be constructive, and we're supporters of the Prime Minister.
Should you be taking the Rwanda deal back to an appeal?
What is really frustrating about that is how it was April 2022 that this policy was first announced. Here we are, 14 months down the line, over 14 months down the line, and the legal establishment of this country is still figuring out whether or not it's OK or not.
I know. Yeah. And all these lawyers on legal aid.
Yeah. But however, important to note, appeal court, Lord Chief Justice agreed with the government.
He did.
And also, it wasn't like the appeal court was saying per se Rwanda is an inappropriate, wrong country. It was a technicality.
It was a technicality. They didn't say it was an unsafe country. They were concerned that there were not enough assurances that some of the people would be sent back to countries which they allegedly fled from to escape terror.
Yeah.
Except I don't think many of them did flee terror. I think most of them are economic migrants.
Well, they've all come from France, so by default they are, because they haven't applied for asylum in the first safe country. And that is a key point to note. I do find it frustrating that many individuals who have never had to live with the consequences of uncontrolled mass migration, huge levels of illegal migration, are many of the most vocal critics of these policies. It's unhealthy. The chasm has opened up between where most of the public are in migration and the reality. This report is part of trying to close that chasm.
Yeah.
That's good for democracy, and I think it will get better outcomes for this country.
All right.
OK, Tom Hunt, MP, thank you so much.
Come and see us again.
Now, the Treasury is planning to tell banks that they must protect free speech as a row over so-called financial counselling is growing bigger by the day.
The Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, is concerned at the increasing blacklisting of customers with controversial views. They include, of course, Nigel Farage, and has asked the City Minister to investigate.
So let's bring in senior Tory backbencher Sir Charles Walker. Good morning, Sir Charles. Thank you so much for joining us. Do you think Jeremy Hunt has a point? Should we be concerned about this?
We should be concerned. Banks have been closing the bank accounts of politicians now for about 6 or 7 years with very little reason to do so. So I think this is just a continuing trend, and Dominic Lawson wrote about it in today's Daily Mail. obviously off the back of Nigel Farage's experience. So it's very good to get this out into the public domain again.
On what basis? I mean, I was staggered to read Dominic Lawson's column today, Sir Charles, talking about his own 16-year-old daughter with Down syndrome. They wouldn't allow her to have a bank account because of her grandfather, the late Nigel Lawson, who is described, of course, as a politically exposed person. I don't get the connection.
So these money laundering rules were brought in by the EU in 2015, and we implemented them into law in 2017, we thought with safeguards. But money laundering rules were really meant to go after despots in corrupt economies and countries. They were never designed to go after members of parliament, members of the House of Lords, and more particularly their children and grandchildren. But the banks have been gold-plating the legislation. And they're not obliged to let you know why they are closing your bank account or refusing you a bank account. They'll just say, no, we can't do that under the tipping off laws. So they can pretty much act as they like.
And what can you do about it? What can the Chancellor of the Exchequer do about it, Sir Charles?
Well, there were meant to be protections in place, and I would suggest that anybody suffering discrimination like Nigel Farage and others go to the Bank of England and Financial Services Act 2016. Sorry, I'm looking at it now. I have it on my desk. And in particular, go to Part 20C, because there are meant to be protections. You can complain to the FCA, you can complain to the Ombudsman, and when banks have been found to be acting unreasonably, they can be subject to a compensation claim. But this just simply isn't working. I don't know why. Banks are sort of turning their face to it. And the situation is getting progressively worse. I mean, I know of backbench members of Parliament who've never held any ministerial office at all, being refused mortgages and having their bank accounts closed purely because they are members of Parliament.
Gosh. Nigel's been at pains to point out that he hasn't had an explanation from the bank. And I think it's completely commonsensical to think if he had done anything that was financially inappropriate, he certainly wouldn't be shining a light on it in this particular way. So what reason could there be, Charles, for Nigel Farage having his bank accounts refused or closed now? Why?
So the banks can do this with impunity because they literally can hide behind the tipping off law and say, no, we're not allowed to tell you why we're closing your bank account because you could be under investigation, which normally isn't the case. I do think Nigel Farage is owed an explanation. I think he should take it up to the FCA, with the FCA. He should quote Part 20C of the Bank of England Act 2016, and he should carry on with this. Now, I know the government is seeking to amend the legislation and put in further protections to prevent banks from behaving this way. But actually, there are meant to be these protections in place now. And what needs to happen is they need to be enforced. That's what needs to happen. It's not, I mean, new laws in this area might be welcome, but if they're not enforced, we'll end up in the same place as we are now.
Absolutely. And it depends who's in power as to what, there'll be people watching this who will say, well, maybe a left-wing person will say, well, I have no problem with Nigel Farage having his bank account frozen. Well, if the political wind changes, it could become any one of us. And that's why this matters, doesn't it?
Well, it doesn't discriminate between Conservative members of Parliament or, say, Labour members of Parliament. And the situation for Labour members of Parliament will become more apparent, dare I say worse, if they were to win the next general election and they were to form the government and hold ministerial office, because obviously they would come under closer scrutiny. Unfairly, might I say. We have a very robust media. Your co-host works for the Daily Mail. The Daily Mail doesn't let politicians get away with much. We have the independent expenses system called IPSO. We have the Register of Members' Interests. We've seen members of Parliament dismissed from Parliament for behaving inappropriately financially. So we have lots of protections in this country to make sure that those people doing wrong are found out. As I say, these laws were designed initially to stop money laundering from corrupt regimes around the world, not to place restrictions on democratically elected politicians or people who have been democratically elected, or appointed to the House of Lords.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, that's Sir Charles Walker. Thanks so much for joining us, Sir Charles Walker, the senior backbencher who's been raising this as an issue.
And quote, Nigel Farage is owed an explanation, he said.
Nigel, if you were watching and listening, you know what to do. The Bank of England Financial Services Act, Clause 24.
We aim to help.
There we are.
Now, President Macron will today urge for calm when he meets with mayors from cities impacted by the ongoing riots.
This comes after a French firefighter died fighting a blaze in an underground car park in a Paris suburb overnight.
157 people were arrested and 3 police officers were injured as the family of the teenager whose killing sparked the violence called for an end to the unrest.
Well, joining us now is the editor of Omerta Media, Regis Le Sommier. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
I suppose, relatively, Regis, it was calmer last night, but 6 days in succession.
Yes, 6 days in succession. Last night, as you said, yes, was a lot calmer. It's not over. It could, restart again. But the police, you have to take into consideration that contrary to the 2 first nights where the riots were the heaviest, the police is now present massively every night. It's about, we have about 45,000 police presence, and this is huge. And this is obviously giving results in terms of the rioters are not going freely as much as they did during the first days, the first nights of the events. But we still have problems in specific areas like Marseille or Grenoble. Like two nights in a row, there have been some shops plundered, and especially in the downtown. They're trying to tackle those problems. But when you look at the overall situation in France, it's a lot quieter than what we faced during the first 2-3 nights of the protests.
Regis, is there much concern in France about the number of people who have been shot dead by the police at traffic points? It was 13 last year, which was a record. I think it's 3 or 4 this year. It does seem a lot.
Yeah, it seems a lot, but it's a consequence of an ongoing violence that has been occurring in France for quite some time. There's been some reform in the use of weapons by the police, especially in legislation and taken in 2017. Whereas, and of course, there've been an uprise, an increasing number of cases where the police used their guns and killed people. But this is also, you have to take into consideration that this is the result of a widespread violence. When you look at maps like this, you take cities like Nantes. Like 20 years ago, Nantes was a peaceful Western France city where people, I think it was probably maybe 20 years ago, it was one of the happiest city in France. And at the moment, it's turned into a nightmare, especially in the downtown. So this level of police intervention is far more widespread than it used to be, and of course, it has created more death by the police trying to stop these people.
Regis, are there calls for harsher state powers to be able to control unrest now?
Well, yeah, when there's a circle of violence like this in France, whereas it was under during the yellow jacket protest or now or before in 2005, there's always a demand for more law enforcement to come up to the streets, and some people go even up to saying that the army should intervene. But, as of now, what we saw, we saw some massive police intervention. They've tried to, tackle the problem, but they also used a number of special units from the French police, which is the BRI, the GIGN, the RED. All these special units normally are not used in tackling unrest, but they're dedicated to the top of the game criminals. But this time around, they've been used in many cities, and so that the French police has said we can tackle this, and the gendarmerie as well, which is the military side of the police, have said, we can tackle this problem. And so far, and the use of the army, trying to tackle civilians unrest is always very problematic. If you remember the British paratroopers in Northern Ireland, for instance, that can be, that can cause a lot of damage when the army. So this is one step, but it's always like a reflex. The people think, oh, we're not protected as enough by the police, so we need the military. But I don't think the military is made for that, and I think the police can do it themselves. But they have to be used wisely, and they have to be used by wise politicians, which I don't personally think the President Macron was at the beginning of these unrests.
OK, all right, thank you so much. The editor of Omerta Media, Regis Le Sommier. There, right, let's see what you've been saying this morning, talking about the NHS in crisis. Gail has said, why don't we consider using cottage hospitals again? The system worked well when I was young, keep all minor ailments treated in the locality and create employment. I couldn't agree more, Gail.
Yeah, I lived in France for many years. You're charged €24 for a doctor appointment and you get a refund of €14 within 2 weeks. That's quite bureaucratic.
It does sound very bureaucratic, doesn't it? And Val says, I lived in France for many... Oh, sorry, you've just done that one. And Paul says, I agree that the NHS should be free if you're British. Currently, it is free for the world.
Yeah, and Linda says, my GP recommended I go private for knee investigations as all the NHS will offer is physio. It turns out my knee is shot. I'm a pensioner. I'm borrowing the money from my family who are themselves already stretched. Can I claim the money back from the NHS, having paid national insurance for 4.5 years? I'm afraid you can't.
Sadly not, Linda.
Linda, that's the truth. And these strikes, I'm afraid, are going to make it much, much worse.
And another one, Tina said, due to long-term illness, I've had to use the NHS for 40 years. In that time, I've noticed that the old-fashioned consultants with very caring bedside manners have progressively got abrupt, and instead I was treated with a careless attitude, basically trying to get me out of the door as quickly as possible. I'm sorry, Tina.
And Anna makes the point that we made earlier. Why on earth are senior doctors allowed to work part-time in private hospitals for part of their working week at NHS hospitals? The point is about these consultants are going on strike. They can, on those 2 strike days, work in the private sector for vast amounts of money, for thousands of pounds.
So they're incentivised to take more strikes.
Yeah, and that's just going to make waiting lists even worse.
Right.
Keep your views coming in, won't you? We'd like to hear from you.
That's right. gbviews@gbnews.com is the email address. We're going to be going to Wimbledon in a little while. The tennis championship begins today. Britain's Newsroom on GB News, the People's Channel. First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's 11:32, you're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
Still to come, we're going to be rejoined by the wonderful Sarah Vine and Bushra Sheikh to go through the biggest day's stories. And Orkney is considering plans to leave the UK and join Norway. We'll tell you why after your morning's news with Tamsin Roberts.
Bev, thanks very much. Here are the headlines at 11:32. A Cabinet Office investigation says Sue Gray broke the Civil Service Code as a result of undeclared contact between herself and the Labour Party. The former senior civil servant led the investigation into lockdown-breaking gatherings in Downing Street. Ms Gray was cleared last week by the Advisory Committee on Business Appointments to start work as Sir Keir Starmer's Chief of Staff in September. The anti-corruption watchdog ruled it had seen no evidence that her decision-making or impartiality was impaired while serving in Whitehall. The British Medical Association says doctors could continue to strike over the next few years if their demands are not met. It comes as junior doctors are planning to stage the largest walkout in the history of the NHS later this month. The 5-day strike action will be from the 13th to the 18th of July. Consultants are planning to stage industrial action also from the 20th to the 21st of July. Almost 650,000 appointments and operations have been postponed in England since the widespread disruption began late last year. NHS workers have been locked in a long-running dispute with the government over pay and conditions. Rail passengers are being warned of disruption as train drivers refuse to work overtime this week. Services with 16 train operators will be running a limited service from today until Saturday as the unions continue to dispute over pay. ASLEF says its members at 15 train operators will take part in the industrial action from the 17th to the 22nd of July. Meanwhile, teachers in England are due to strike this week after they rejected a 4.5% pay rise from the government. It comes as Labour claims state schools in England have paid over £8 billion to recruitment agencies since 2010. The party says it plans to introduce a new payment to encourage teacher recruitment and to keep existing educators after completing the 2-year early career framework. Well, you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2676 and €1.1644. The price of gold is £1,509 and 15 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,553 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
We're reading the papers then.
We were.
We got caught napping. Anyway, welcome back to GB News. The 136th Wimbledon Championship starts today with men's and women's singles first round matches. Reigning men's champion Novak Djokovic will kick off the tournament on centre court.
Our reporter Lisa Hartley is at Wimbledon and she sends this report.
So this is the 136th Wimbledon. We've got obviously Wimbledon and queuing. Is there anything more British? I don't think so. So if we have a look around here, you can see there are thousands of people that are queuing up in the hope of getting a ticket to Wimbledon. There are 1,500 tickets that are released each day. So that's for people willing to queue up and secure their tickets. It's a way of, I suppose, the most hardcore Wimbledon fans of actually getting that place inside. We've also got, so these are people queuing up for today. Some of them have been here since 4:30 this morning. We've also got some really hardcore Wimbledon fans. I'll ask them if they agree with that in just a moment, who have been camping last night, and you guys are camping tonight to get tickets tomorrow. So it's Matt and Scott. Are you hardcore Wimbledon fans?
We are probably slightly more bonkers than most, yeah. We were originally planning to come today, so the original plan was we were going to get an early train this morning and come down for about 2 o'clock. But looking at Twitter last night and how the queue was starting to build, we thought maybe that was a bit risky because we could technically get here 14 hours earlier if we got the last train out last night. So that's what we did, and we got here at midnight.
OK, so tell me what it was like camping out overnight, because I read that queuing up is part of the fun.
It is part of the fun, yeah, it is fun. Didn't get much sleep because particularly last night there was a hubbub all night long as more people were arriving. Yeah, I mean, got time to crash today, so it's not too bad. And yeah, it is, you meet some lovely people. We're all here for the same reason. We all love tennis. So there's people who've been doing it for 20 years plus. This is my 5th year, so I've done a few now. Yeah, we tend to do one night's camping if we need to, just to make sure we get what we want, really.
So Scott, tell me why you're camping for 2 nights.
Well, we in previous years, because this is my 4th time, we've seen Federer, Djokovic, Nadal, but we haven't seen Andy Murray. So with him going to be playing this year, I'm playing on the Tuesday. We wanted specifically to be in the draw for the Tuesday to hopefully get to see him wherever he plays, whichever court. So that was the aim this year.
So what's the draw with Wimbledon? Because I've spoken to people that have come from all over the world to be here.
I mean, there aren't many, in fact, any, I think, major sports tournaments where you can queue, you can come without having got a pre-booked ticket. You can queue for a night or 2 nights in our case, and get into possibly centre court, get into some of the see some of the most elite players.
So Novak Djokovic is due to kick off the tournament today. So the tournament's going to last 2 weeks, and Venus Williams is returning for the first time in 2 years.
Oh, thank you so much, Lisa. That looks absolutely lovely, doesn't it? Right, still to come, Sarah Vine and Bushra Sheikh with today's top stories, including the Bank of England's latest woke claim anyone can be pregnant.
I can't be, for certain. And it's not just...
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
It's 11:42. You're with Britain's Newsroom on TV News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner. We're going to dive into the papers again with our 2 favourite divers into the papers. Fabulous Sarah Vine, push for shake.
We're going to make another Crown Jewels.
No more Crown Jewels jokes. We've got our fabulous king up in Scotland doing his bit.
Right, Sarah, we started this story just before and we got cut off. Any gender identity can be pregnant, says the Bank of England. What on earth are they talking about?
Yeah, so the Bank of England has decided, because it wants to be on Stonewall's top 100 list of Stonewall-approved companies. So it's got all this sort of new sort of advice, and one of the things is that any gender can be pregnant, and it's also going to use its private health insurance system to pay for employees to have gender reassignment surgery if they want to. So it's fully signed up to the Stonewall agenda.
Why do they want to please Stonewall so badly?
I honestly don't know. But this is about banks getting involved in this kind of never-ending culture war. And, we were talking earlier about people having their bank accounts cancelled, effectively, which is what it is, if they don't say or think the right things. And this is just an extension of that. But it shows how deep this thing goes into our institutions, because we've seen it with students, we've seen it with universities, we've seen it with institutions like National Trust, things that you would, and now it's embedded in the banks as well. We're all going to be carted off. Quite soon.
The Bank of England has made a complete horlicks of the economy. Interest rates soaring because they didn't put them up sooner, and here they are now obsessing about a minority issue.
And it's the classic sort of low-hanging fruit thing, which is that you can't do your actual job, which is to run the economy properly. So you're going to sort of faff around doing this sort of stuff. And, and Stonewall, of course, get paid, you see, to provide these diversity courses. They get paid to go into schools, they get paid to go into... And so a lot of taxpayer money goes on this stuff. I don't know.
A lot of Whitehall departments are signed up to it.
A lot of Whitehall departments are signed to it. And what they do is they create this list, which people feel they have to be on. And then in order to get on the list, you have to pay Stonewall to train you, to tell you how to be on this. It's a brilliant business model.
It is a brilliant
business
model.
When you think about it.
But isn't it just, again, this is the Bank of England just pandering to the woke mob
And it just imposes on the majority of people that actually do not agree with what they're doing. For me, it's just ludicrous that that when it comes to gender identity politics, like you say, Sarah, it is a culture war. And the majority of us understand when male and female and what that looks like. But then when you have banks who do have control and power that start pushing this narrative, it's just dangerous.
But again, I just don't understand how the banks think they can sort of have some sort of moral high ground. Just they're banks. Let's look at how they've behaved over the last 20 years, how they've destroyed so many people's lives.
And why are they making such a big song and dance about it?
I don't know.
To distract.
It's the ESG narrative. It's every corporation having to tick these environmental, social, governance, but it's coming very quietly and it's so powerful. You would, as Andrew, as a gay man, you would appreciate what Stonewall has done for many years.
They were brilliant in the 80s and 90s about getting equality, and I used to march in the days when it was very unfashionable to march, and yes, we did get spat at and sworn at and all the rest of it, but that's part of it. And Stonewall were brilliant at engaging with government, and they got equal age of consent and same-sex marriage.
Got rid of that awful
Section 28 went.
Yeah.
And so Stonewall then should have called it a day, because job done. Instead, they latched onto the trans part of LGBT. They've now added a Q and a something else. I don't know what all the rest is. And they've become an obsessive organisation about trans issues, and they've successfully put this in the agenda, where it's now becoming completely out of proportion.
But also, what's the thing is that I think this is a proper threat to democracy, because people who run banks are not elected, and yet they are making really serious decisions about how we manage our society and our culture. And Nigel Farage, whatever you think of him, he's part of a democratic system. And so are other politicians. Politicians who are elected, backbench, whatever, they are elected by that's democracy. It seems to me that now that democracy is so unimportant. It's basically about how much money you have and how much influence you have, which takes us on to the Twitter story, which you were going to talk about.
Corporations are becoming the new government.
The old lady, I mean, the nickname is to be the old lady of Threadneedle Street. If the old lady ever lived, she'd be spinning in her grave, wouldn't she, to think this is what the Bank of England is now doing. It's appalling.
It is. So, the Twitter story, Bushra, there that Sarah mentioned, what's Elon Musk been doing since he took over Twitter?
Elon Musk's playground is Twitter. It's like a little toy for him. I can literally just imagine him sat there on his phone just going, I can just mess around with Twitter because it's just a hobby of mine. Literally, that's what I think. I think he plays with his audience. He plays with people. Things are not set in stone. But, for a lot of people, Twitter is a lifeline. And I get the whole touch and grass. Come off social media and enjoy real life. I get that part. But this is almost like a status-tiered kind of society on Twitter that's evolving. If you can pay the premium price, then you pay and you get to see more accounts and more views and more stories. For me, this is just really, really confusing because it goes against what Elon Musk was trying to do with Twitter. Because essentially, giving people this access to say, well, actually, you can only see 400 accounts and then you've exceeded that limit, means they will just divert to another platform.
He came in with this kind of egalitarian ambition. It was going to be a safe space, it was going to be the town square, and everyone could say what they want and it would be against censorship. And what he's doing, Sarah, in monetising it, he's having to impose restrictions to make it work.
Yeah, it's very difficult to monetise these things when you don't set up the infrastructure. So he's limiting the amount of views that people can see, and he claims it's all because of data collection, but it's obviously because he wants people to pay to see more.
Yes.
Quite honestly. Personally, I don't think that if Twitter disappeared tomorrow, I honestly think the world would be a much better place.
And I think we've survived.
Disagree. I love it.
I would be fine.
I don't pay anything for Twitter.
Sarah's old school.
I'm old school. I'm delighted.
But
then I think that we should turn the internet off at 10 o'clock at night.
I agree with you on that.
Do you have a blue tick after your...
Yes.
And do you, Bev?
Yes.
See, I don't, because and I think now you have to...
You have to pay £8 a month.
Well, I'm not doing that.
Well, I was happy. Do you know what? I had one anyway. Did you have one? I had one anyway because basically the blue tick, it means you are who you say you are. So if you're in the public eye or you're a journalist, you've got a byline in a paper, you get a tick. 'Cause it's not someone impersonating you. And then one of the things that he did was to change the business model. So you subscribe now. But you see, it's a publication platform, isn't it? So if you are somebody who is politically engaged, like you are, Bushra, it's your mouthpiece, it's your platform. Yes. When you don't have the beauty of newspaper columns like you two have.
Yes, but the thing about newspaper columns is that they adhere to certain rules. People check them. They make sure there are no mistakes in them, and if there are, we apologise. You know, there are rules around the mainstream. There are no rules on Twitter. I mean, Bushra gets horribly trolled.
It's the Wild West, isn't it? It is the Wild West.
That's part of it. Getting trolled is part of it, but places like Twitter, these platforms are a voice for people that don't get an opportunity.
I agree, but they should be regulated.
That for me is really important because people want to be heard. Otherwise, you lack purpose. You're like, I've got all these ideas and these thoughts, and I can't.
You're like Nigel Farage without a bank account. Yeah, that's the problem.
But the thing is, though, that people can say what they like on Twitter about people, and a lot of it is absolute rubbish.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And some of it's libelous, and some of it's very damaging. I mean, one of the things that Nigel Farage was saying was that he thinks that one of the reasons that he has been shut out of his bank account is because a Labour MP said something about him taking money from Russia on Twitter.
Said it in Parliament under absolute privilege.
And it went all over Twitter, and so, you know, as a result, it's gained traction, and, you know, it's not true.
It's not true.
So there are serious issues there about how people on Twitter conduct themselves. And the thing about the internet is that it doesn't matter if you said something. It doesn't really matter whether it's, you know, you get told off for saying something that's not true. The fact is, it's out there, and it will have been retweeted and retweeted, and you can't get it back.
He shouldn't have said, if that wasn't true and he had no evidence for it, that MP should not have said that, in my opinion, in the House of Commons anyway.
And he's refusing to withdraw it.
If it's a rumour...
Yeah, and he's refusing to withdraw it too. It's Chris Bryant who's the MP.
That's right. And so that, for me, was the problem. But I think having these free spaces, because as much as we love your newspaper, there will also be an editorial line.
Yeah, I agree.
And the idea that an individual can take their own editorial line. And I kind of trust the public to work out what's true and what's nonsense.
Yeah, I think places like Twitter are needed, and I think there's a fine line between understanding how to move forward with it, because there are some very dangerous sides as well to social media.
Do you read why do you read
you were talking about...
when you're being trolled, why do you bother to read it?
Oh, I don't anymore, because this is too many. And this is obviously going to take us into another story, hopefully, that we might get to. Perhaps we can even touch on it now.
Go for it. Yeah,
where Twitter, it was the first case. So Twitter, before Elon Musk took over, took the Indian government to court, because what the Indian government wanted was to shut down certain accounts that were on Twitter that existed, or websites that were anti-Modi or anti-India government. So they wanted to control who was being seen, the retweets on Twitter. So Twitter decided, actually, this is not free speech. We're not going to censor people.
Well, that's good.
But Twitter got fined, so they lost the case. They ended up...
They got fined by an Indian court?
Indian court for £50,000, or just underneath.
So much for the great judiciary we left India when we gave them independence.
But in saying that, though, I was reading something the other day to say that there are actual Twitter troll farms in India with hundreds of accounts, literally.
And Russian ones too.
And Russian, where they just sit there and they get paid to troll, to push political agendas, and there's hundreds of thousands of them.
And we saw it in the run-up to the Trump's election as well, and how that was. We will see it again in the next 18 months with elections here and elections in America. But on the whole, I like the fact that it brings people together.
Is Trump ever back on Twitter?
No, he set up his own alternative network.
Good for him.
Is it called True?
He's gone something called Parler. I don't know. I get
something.
confused.
Yeah, he set up his own one.
It'll be duller without him.
And do you know what will be duller?
It's fun to have Twitter. I think it's so much fun to have the interaction with all different people.
Yeah. You know what will be duller is a day without you two, because we're done. Bushra and Sarah Vine, thank you very much for coming in. We've come to the end of the show. It's flown by. Coming up next is The Live Desk with Mark Longhurst and Pip Thompson. We will be back with Britain's Newsroom tomorrow at 9:30.
See you then.
Hello. It's looking rather changeable across the UK through the next few days. This afternoon we'll see a mixture of sunshine and showers, quite breezy as well, and thanks to all of that, it will feel quite cool. The reason why low pressure still very much dominates our weather, centred just towards the northeast of the UK, and with that, a lot of ice bars, as you can see on the pressure chart here. That's what's going to bring those strong winds. And this weather front here, that's what's going to bring some more organised showery rain through the rest of the afternoon. So you can see this rain here slowly pushing its way eastwards through the day, so cloudy over for many areas, outbreaks of rain, in between some sunshine and showers, but more more organised rain affecting the far north of Scotland through the afternoon with some brisk winds here. Now, thanks to all of that, it will be quite cool across northern Scotland, with afternoon highs reaching just 11 to 13 degrees. Comes from further south, we could see 18 to 22, but in those showers and strong winds, it really will feel quite cool for the time of the year. Now, that first band of rain will clear eastwards through the night, and then behind it we'll see a mixture of clear spells and showers, some more organised rain once again across parts of Scotland. And then through the night, another band of showery rain spreading across southern parts of England and Wales. Again, some of that could be on the heavy side. Relatively mild in the south, but come further north and in any clear spells, it will turn quite cool. Overnight lows of 8 to 11 degrees. So we get off to a fairly bright start across some parts of England, Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland, but further south, that first band of rain will slowly clear its way eastwards. A bit of uncertainty about the exact timing of that rain clearing, but behind it, sunshine appearing once again, and again another afternoon of sunshine and showers. Some of the showers, particularly across southern Scotland, could be on the heavy side with the risk of hail and thunder. Again, a disappointingly cool day